The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's press conference, Industry Collaboration with the UNH-IOL's new SDN Consortium. My name is Mara Bernazani. I'm the Communications Coordinator at the UNH Interoperability Laboratory, and I will serve as your moderator today. Our speaker today will be Timothy Winters, UNH-IOL Senior Executive of Software and IP Networking. After his presentation, we will have a Q&A session. We encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the presentation by using the question box on your screen. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. The hashtags for the press conference are #SDN and #SDN Testing. For those joining by phone, please mute your line by pressing the green mic button and do not put the conference call on hold. Okay, let's get started. I would like to turn the time over to Timothy.
Thanks, Mara. This is Timothy Winters from the UNH-IOL, and today I'm presenting on the networking industry's collaboration with the UNH-IOL on our brand new SDN Consortium. So today's news, what we're announcing is the IOL is launching a new SDN networking consortium with the goal of fostering industry-wide collaboration. We've been approached by several different user groups, network manufacturers, application vendors about creating a place where all of them can come and do collaborative efforts to further the mission of SDN. One of the other things we have here is an advantage for the IOL is we do have a multi-million-dollar SDN switch testbed, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, that makes us a prime location to do something like this. We're opening it on August 1st. Another important aspect of what we do here that I'm going to talk about today is training engineers of tomorrow, in this case, the student engineers that work here in SDN. So that's what we'll be announcing or talking about today. The presentation outline. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the IOL, what it is, how it works with the industry, and how we get involved with different industry groups here beyond SDN, just to give a broad idea of what we do. And then I'm going to get more specific and talk about the SDN Consortium, the state of SDN, SDN Interoperability and Conformance testing we've performed up till now, and what we're looking at in the future. Performance testing, use cases which are very important to SDN. We're going to cover different ones inside of this consortium, and student training are the main areas of this consortium. Who is the IOL? The IOL was founded in 1988. We come out of the research department here, but we are 100% funded by commercial industry. What this means is we don't get money from tuition dollars or other ways to the university. We get it all through companies who want to come work at the IOL, work with us. They fund basically paying students to work, do testing. We have 140 employees here. About 100 of them are undergraduate students. We have 10 to 20 graduate students at any given time, and we have 20 full-time staff that are sort of doing the business development. We have a brand new building that we moved into. We're really excited about. We moved in January. And it's sort of built for us. It's really nice. It's right downtown Durham, so it's right within the heart of the university. Before, we were about a mile off campus, so we're much happier being much closer to the students. It's easier for them to walk to classes and such. We've also found that our vendors who come to our Plugfest space are much happier to be closer to the university. They can see it. They can go over and see what's going on. It's an important part of what we do. We also have a Plugfest space, which I'm going to talk about more later, that's 4,000 square feet. It's pre-wired, which is a big advantage of that space. That it's easy to come in and bring your equipment in. It's carry in, carry out. All of that's part of who the IOL is. What the IOL does, we have this mission. We have a dual mission here of A, working with the networking industry and trying to help collaborate wherever we can. And then we have the second part of our mission is working with student engineers. So for the first part of it, we work really closely for our interoperability and conformance testing. What that means is, we have different areas that we test. For conformance testing, We take a standard, we read it, and we write all of the individual state machines, for example. We find all the sections where it says you shall do something or you must do something. And we write test cases to make sure that devices are compliant to those RFCs. The second part of what we do is obviously in our name, it's interoperability. It's taking all those devices that come in for conformance and testing them against one another. It's an important part of what we do. We also have Plugfests here. Often that's early adoption. So in chipset designs this week, for example, Plugfest going on where companies are coming in and bringing their GFAST solutions to come in and test against each other hardware-wise. In the open source community, today have turned Plugfests, or almost a lot of people call them hackathons, something very similar to that, where it's groups of developers that want to come in, or hardware developers that want to bang against each other. They want to make sure that stuff works, and they all get in a room together and sort of work out issues. That's what we do. We often, I'll talk a little bit more about how we engage industry next. So standards come out from individual groups, and today standards often vary, not just documents, but often software now as the world has changed around us. And it's a good part about being part of a university and having access to all of these computer science and electrical engineer students. We're able to read standards, documentation, open source projects from standard groups, whether it's the IETF, the ITU, IEEE, ONF, all these different industries broadband forum. We work with all of them. One of the things we do is we read those standards and we provide feedback. Very often we're a neutral place for when two companies disagree or are reading a line different. If we bring it up as a neutral third party, people sort of take a different view of it as, you know, there might be a real problem here. It's not a company trying to make money. There's a real issue and we might want to resolve it. Another thing we do is we take user groups we interact with, and user groups in this case is service providers, enterprises, data centers, the federal government in the case for our US government testing we do. We take all the different things they might want to do and we create results and feedback. Sometimes those results are from user groups such as forums, and they use them for their certification programs. And then the last group is obviously developers that are building the code, building the implementations. They want to send us equipment and get back results so that they can address any issues they might have. In some cases, sales departments, you know, with certification, those kind of things, are doing that. So that's how we engage industry. And this is a slide that has the logos for several different forums. As you can see, the IOL has a wide breadth of testing we do here. It's anywhere from physical layer Ethernet testing to up the stack all the way up. We test MIPI, which is mobile processors. We do OPNFV, InfiniBand. BACnet is a group that does Plugfest here. That's industrial. Open Alliance is based on cars, which is a cool new area that we're working with. So as you can see, the IOL works with a lot of different industries in a lot of different ways. And that's a really important part of what we do, and we interact with this. But today, I'm talking about SDN. So SDN is the area we're tackling right now. SDN solutions at this point in a networking, if we're talking about the state of networking, this is often I give this every year to my students and it changes every year, and this has become a major slide that we have to talk about now because as networks have become more complex, the need to be able to program networks is almost becoming essential. They're so complex now that no human can look at the config or be able to, you know, people want their networks to respond very quickly, so this has become a really important part of that. Also, you know, business-wise, there's been lots of studies done, and it's a growing industry. It's not shrinking. People are projecting very large numbers going forward. The other thing about SDN deployments that's very important is we want to make sure that multi-vendor deployments, you know, SDN is going to be such a large thing. One vendor ruling your whole network is not realistic, probably not possible. So you want to make sure that multi-vendor networks work. A lot of this has to do with legacy networks. Obviously, if you're building a brand new data center and you don't have any equipment in it, you have a little, it's not as big of a concern. You know, down the road it will be. But most networks have equipment in it, and they need to make sure that they can interoperate together, and that's where we're at right now with SDN. That's part of what we're trying to do. So we're going to offer this new SDN Consortium. I talked a little bit earlier about the consortium model, but at the IOL, what a consortium is a group of companies that want to get together and split the cost of keeping a test bed up and being able to run the testing. One of the things we do here is these vendors come in and we run the testing so that vendors, due to accessing other vendors' equipment, we, as our student engineers, are basically the engineers who access the different equipment to generate reports so that vendors can say, hey, I worked with these 2 guys in a deployment. They can take it to their sales department. That's obviously step 1 that we're doing with this consortium, is we're offering interoperability testing in particular between switches and controllers. We've also been doing up to this point ONF OpenFlow Conformance switch testing, and we're also starting to offer benchmark testing for OpenFlow in particular, but that's going to be a little bit wider than that in the very near future. SDN interoperability. So the first thing here is we have a very large, very expensive switch test bed, and this comes from, we have a lot of switches here for our US government test program, which is a requirement to test IPv6. So a lot of switches come in to test their routing infrastructure. Some of them are just testing as a host. We also do have our Ethernet groups that are testing things like 40 and 100 gig Ethernet, or 10 base G and 2.5 and 5 gigahertz. So we're getting these new latest switches, and they're here. They do the Ethernet testing. We have access to them for the SDN Consortium. This is a big win for us. We have this giant new facility that's full of Ethernet switches that could easily have access to SDN. We also have access is another area. We have access switches, so DSLAMs, CMTSs for our home networking group or our DSL group, and that's another area we've seen SDN increase in interest. So we have these extensive test beds that it's just a matter of getting the firmware turning on SDN so that people can interop with them. So for controllers, this makes a lot of sense. They don't have to track down lots of different switches. In a minute, I have a slide to show all the different switches, just an example of companies we have here that have SDN-enabled switches. On the other side of controllers, we have Open Daylight, ONOS, and Ryu-based controllers. I say based controllers because a lot of the, not proprietary, but a lot of vendor solution controllers are based on those 3. We have experience with them. We've done Plugfest here using them. We also use them on a regular basis for our interop testing. And in this case, based on that experience, we're able to do things like we know how they work, how to get them up and functioning relatively quickly. In this case, it gives switch vendors access to not have to keep up those controllers, not to have the knowledge. A big thing we hear from our switch vendors is they don't want to have to understand 4 different controllers. They just want to know how their stuff works and how they might need to address it. A common one we'll get for OpenFlow, for example, would be it tries to write to a read-only table on a switch. It doesn't work. And then you can work with both vendors to how to resolve that issue. So that's part of what we do here. We also have application. In this case, an application can come in and say, I want to make sure that I can work with 2 different controllers. No problem. You can either drop in your Open Daylight module or you can put in ONOS and we can work with either of those. So that's something that we work with here at the IOL. Switch vendors, this is a list of some of the vendors we have here that have SDN-enabled switches that are here already running their wide variety of products from them, whether it's routers, switches, whatever they have. I'll just give you a sample of who we're currently working with. SDN Conformance, so this is an area of conforming to SDN standards. Some of these standards are obviously in different states, so OpenFlow has a conformance program that we're a member lab of. We can offer that testing right now. We're also working, from request, we're working on things like NetConf, RESTConf, and VXLAN conformance. In this case, it's coming from customer request to the switch vendors. The IETF doesn't have a testing certification body, for example, for something like NetConf. So we become a place where people sort of de facto come and say, hey, did you test all the must in this standard? We'll write some test cases. We have a tool here that we created using our student engineers called IOL Intact that those will be implemented on, that our members will have access to and be able to run the testing in-house. Going forward for conformance, we fully envision as northbound APIs get defined. It's an area we're following closely. As northbound APIs get defined, I think this would also fall into our conformance testing going forward for a consortium like this. Performance testing, what we're going to be doing here is testing the IETF benchmarking draft. This has a wider, the IETF SDN controller draft has a wider breadth than the ONF one. So the ONF benchmarking test specification focuses on just OpenFlow. The IETF one focuses on other things. We're inclusive, anything SDN, so we'll be testing all of those. In some cases, we'll be giving them direct feedback as we find issues or additional test cases that might be useful. Again, this is where we work very closely with like a data center or a service provider to make sure that whatever measurements we're using matter to them. And that's really important to us. So we work really closely with those user groups. We also work with here at the IOL, Spire and Nixia, both of them in this case, to help us create test cases or use their equipment, what it's capable of. For scale and latency, they also have really nice traffic patterns to represent different types of use cases. We'll be working closely with them. Again, this gives, customers can then purchase the stuff in-house to use it, or it just gives us more tools to use for this type of testing. SDN application, this is a newer area, but I did want to touch on it. Consortium members share the cost of all of these, so it would be really expensive for an application member to build a test bed full of controllers and switches. Our fee is $20,000, which is cheaper than several of the switches they would just have access to, one-off switches. One of the things we do is we create specific test cases for applications that allow the application vendor, if they tell us what it can do, we'll create a test case or a test plan, depending on the size of it, that'll verify that that application works in our test environment. So what we do there is we set up the network topology, and then we verify that it works in a variety of different ways to make sure the application works. Use cases, this is really important going forward. These are some of the use cases we think this consortium is going to try to tackle. And by try to tackle, these are areas we're actually focusing on in the consortium. We're going to focus on Internet of Things. We have some experience here. We worked with some service providers on SDN Internet of Things. With smart meters, we've continued that work to work with virtual CPEs. We think Internet of Things is a big SDN use case because what we're hearing from service providers or other providers is, as these billions of devices gotten on the network, the sensors are giving back information. You have to react accordingly, and SDN is really a nice tool to be using to be able to react properly to information you're getting from sensors. SDN-WAN is another very large one for us. This one is more in our traditional space in that we've been working with a lot of the routing and switching vendors on testing routing protocols, MPLS, T1 testing over the years. We used to have an ATM consortium, those types of things. This is just a progression for us in that these SDN-WAN vendors are now asking for, can we do software-defined WAN? Can we check out all these individual things we might have to add for our enterprise branches? So we'll be continuing to focus on that use case. The last use case is NFV. This is one really focused on the service provider side of things. What we're going to be doing here is we currently collaborate with OPNFV. So OPNFV is kind of out of scope for this consortium. We work with that through another avenue, but we want to make sure that the SDN Consortium is doing things that dovetail nicely into what the orchestration. This lets the OPNFV group focus on the orchestration aspect. They can sort of trust that the SDN stuff's going to work underneath of it, is where we'd like to see those two really work together. The last thing that's really important to us is training future engineers. So a really important part, an interesting part of SDN is working with students in this space is a little bit interesting because it's a little easier than teaching someone who has networking experience to kind of break down the walls that SDN is so different and all the problems or all the things that it solves. They're used to their network being set up very specifically. They're used to configuration being a certain way. With students, it's much easier to teach them right off the bat. This is SDN. It's going to be a thing that exists, and this is how it works. And you've got these programmable switches in the network. Also, we work really closely, I didn't mention this earlier, is white box switches in our Open Compute group. And this is another area where our students are quickly learning that a switch can have any operating system. They install it. They use SDN. These are all skills we're trying to give our students to help move the networking industry forward. So these students have the ability to go out and get a job and say, yeah, I've worked with Open Daylight controllers. If a company wants to hire them to develop that code, they're working on it right now. Those types of areas, our students are gaining those skills here at the IOL. They're also learning how to work with lots of different switches. We have this diverse test bed. It gives them a lot of experience. They're also excellent QA engineers. Obviously, that's what they do now. But most of our students get hired into other positions because of their knowledge. So that's an important part of what we do. We also build tools here at the lab, and so our students are gaining skills such as bug tracking. A lot of the students, it's their first, when they work with a software tool, they've never seen code. It's millions of lines of code for some of our tools. This gives them the ability to work on a large project in a safe environment. They learn how to do commits if they break the build. If there's nightly builds, they learn about that process. We also have customers, bug tracking, all of that. These are all skills that we're giving to our students in the SDN space to help train them. So now we're going to open the floor for any questions you might have. Pass it back to you for now, Mara.
Thank you, Timothy. As he mentioned, we're now ready to answer some questions submitted. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the questions box in your control panel. Our first question is from David from Current Analysis, and his question is specifically related to the students. So what does UNH, get out of the IOL?
So the university, there's a couple of things. We came out of the research department because we got a grant and we bought two pieces of equipment, put them together, and they didn't work. And we wrote the two companies what the problems were, and we sort of launched from that. That was in 1988. Today, what the university gets out of us is, one, we're the applied aspect. Our students, it's not a course for them. They interview, we pay them, there's reviews. I think I just read we had 71 applicants and we only had 20 positions. So it's a highly sought after job here at the university. For the university, they get, this prestige of working with companies, and also the student education. We have a lot of students who attend the university just to work here at the lab. We have a high school internship program that we do every summer that gets students excited, and they end up coming to the university and working at the lab the whole 4 years they're here.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Drew. What are the benefits to the customers of vendors who participate in IOL?
So the customers of the vendors, so in this case, we work really closely with them. In most cases, it's them working with us to create test specifications or test cases that apply to them. And this, it's no cost to them, and they just ask for the IOL report, and they get an IOL report from the vendor saying they interrupt. So in a lot of cases, we work really closely with these users to make sure that, hey, your test cases work for us. It cuts out all the basic stuff. The example I often give service providers, we can cut out a lot of the basic testing they need to do, so they can do their special network testing, right? They can know, a common example for me would be a routing protocol, or we do a lot of testing for IPv6. We make sure that all of that works so that when the service provider gets it, he can focus on his deployment or whatever issues he might have, not on can it get a v6 address. That's what we're, think we're going to do with SDN. You don't have to worry about the controller and switch talking to each other. You can worry about much higher level stuff. Because it's really disappointing if you buy an SDN switch, you think it's going to work, you plug it into your controller and it can't talk to it at all because it's not, it's writing to the wrong tables. Those are read-only. Just really simple stuff, not even getting into I need a metering feature or I need multi-table. All of those things would be stuff that would be investigating in this case. So it's at low cost to the customer of the vendor to get those reports for them.
So we had a couple questions regarding, do we have any current members for the SDN Consortium yet? If so, who?
This is not something we have a couple of vendors we're currently in talks with, so this is not something we're going to announce right now, but we do have a lot of vendors interested. We're also thinking that after this, we're going to hear a lot more from more companies. Those switch vendors, for a lot of them, it's just a natural progression. They work with us already in switching and routing spaces. We envision a lot of those coming along for this type of consortium.
We have our next question from Brian. How does UNH-IOL fit in with other labs looking at SDN and NFV? Example, cable labs, etc.
Yeah, so we work really closely with cable labs. ENTC is another one that's got their new agency that they work with. We work closely with all of those labs. In this case, often what we find is demographics come into it. So for the ONF, we work with, I think it's 7 different labs already for that certification program. That's really, we want to collaborate with other labs. The important part is we don't want you to go to 2 different labs and get 2 different results. We want to be doing the same testing because we want to grow SDN. So in our case, we're nonprofit, so we're not a commercial lab. It's one of the advantages we have. We really want to collaborate with other labs and work with them to create testing programs. I envision us continuing to work with them. For example, for OP, NFV, and cable labs, we went to the Plugfest, helped them plan it. That's part of what we do. So we're very a collaborative organization when it comes to other labs.
Great, thank you. Our next question will be from David. Are clients geographically located around New Hampshire? NA-based, or global?
Global, typically. Obviously, New Hampshire is a small state, so we have 100 and I think it's 170 memberships that are 150 plus companies. So it's global. We're definitely a global organization. We work with customers all over the world. A lot of times we have the ability to test remotely. Customers come in, run testing from all over the world. So we work with customers everywhere. We're open for business to anyone.
So now we have some questions from students, staff, and the greater lab community. Once again, reminder, we do have a couple minutes left for some additional questions. What kind of testing schedule do you anticipate?
So we typically envision, a 4-week lead time, and we think these testings are going to take 2 to 3 weeks, probably 2 weeks of actual testing and a week of reporting, depending on how many customers come in. A good part of being part of a university, as I mentioned, we had 71 applicants and only 20 positions accepted. If a lot of customers came in, we would obviously up the number of students, and more of those students would get accepted and get jobs. So we have an easy growth path here for the IOL if more customers come in, but we would like to keep it to 4 to 6 weeks for the lead time for scheduling.
Our next question is from Stephen. If you do not join the consortium, are you able to use the consortium's resources?
So joining the consortium gives you access to scheduled testing inside of the test bed. Sometimes, for example, we have customers who submit equipment and want to have it be part of our interop testing, but they don't actually want reports. So in that case, they're not actually consortium members. They're just putting their equipment there. If we find a bug, for example, we would alert them. Like, hey, we found this interop issue with you and then someone else. Here's the problem. We give them information about it, but they don't get individual reports that they can use. Part of the consortium, that's what they're paying for, is to have access to the test bed to be able to schedule testing, get reports, and keep it up and running. There's power. As I mentioned, we're nonprofit, so the price is relatively low. It's to keep on power, keep students working here, creating test specifications, those types of things. So yes, members, our test plans are public, so that part, no, you don't have to be a member for. But if you want to have us run testing, so that you can get a report, yes, you would need to be a consortium member.
Our next question is also from student staff. How many new members are you looking for the SDN Consortium?
I think, after this launch, we're thinking somewhere, and this is going to sound like a wide range, but 5 to 15 is what we're currently forecasting. Obviously, as I mentioned, we'd love to get a lot more. We have consortiums here that is as high as 50. We have consortiums here that are as little as 5 members. We can go at whatever speed. The more members we have, and if they can work on an area, we can obviously put more resources toward developing tools, test specifications around those. So we would love to get somewhere between 5 and 15 in this consortium in the first year. We think that's a pretty reasonable number.
Our next question is from Kelly. Do you anticipate annual or semi-annual SDN Plugfest events? Do you have any SDN Plugfests planned? So
we did the ONF App Fest this spring. I would envision us probably doing another one next year. Some of this is coordination with making sure we stay out of the way of other SDN Plugfests, as odd as this is going to sound. We want to collaborate. We don't want to create a situation where people are competing. So where it makes sense, I think we will absolutely be doing some SDN or other interop type Plugfest events. What we've also found in this space, though, is that people are more interested in having year-round access. This is sort of why we created the consortium. The Plugfest was great for people to drop stuff off and then leave. The problem we were having is people would find issues and not have enough time to resolve them. So what happened after the App Fest is we got a lot of requests to keep the test bed up, and that, to us, at that point, is a consortium. So what we need to do is create these test beds so that people can have remote access so they can do testing throughout the year. It doesn't get rid of the need for a Plugfest because it's great to have all the developers in the room, but a lot of the companies, what we found was it didn't fit their schedule, and we were better off just creating an environment where they could come in at their when they need to.
Are standards sufficiently fixed to be tested against? If so, which standards will you focus upon, or will you be more looking to benchmark performances?
So we'll be doing a little bit of both here at the IOL. There are standards out there, for example, the OpenFlow switch is a prime example of a standard that exists and people are implementing. That's one that we'll obviously be testing. There are other ones that have developed. We're going to continue. Next week, for example, I'm at the IETF. We obviously work really closely with all the standards that come out of that group. We'll be following those. I think in SDN's case, there's not a fixed standard yet. It's still developing. Some of this is also as deployments are happening, users are giving them different problems that need to be solved in a variety of ways. For benchmarking, we're going to continue to work with the IETF document that they have now, and we're going to continue to work with the ONF on their benchmarking and work with user groups. I believe in both these cases, it's going to be an evolution. I don't think this is going to be testing one and done. And once the standards come out, we're done testing. I think this is going to be an evolution over time. That's one of the things that's going to be a challenge for this consortium, is constantly evolving the testing to meet the needs of the user groups out there.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Sterling. How much of the testing output is made public versus kept for members only?
So that's a really good question. Typically, members come in and do testing with us to get the reports for themselves. In some cases, we write, in a lot of cases with emerging technologies, we write white papers where if we find consistent issues or figured out a solution to a problem. So the individual reports belong to the individual members. They're not supposed to, in most cases, the vendor will promote when they do something correctly. This is where certification programs come along. If a certification, for example, like ONF switch is another one, you can go out and get an ONF sticker and put it on your, and that's sort of how they're marketing their public information. In a lot of cases, we've written white papers for SDN. We wrote a research article about our VCBs. That's sort of how some of that information comes out. We work with our customers to put out, when interesting information, we find vehicles to do that. But the individual reports are kept to those companies.
Looks like we have time for one more question. In case we didn't get your question answered live, we will address that question offline. Our last question came in from Drew. Can you provide more details on what you're looking to test for SD-WAN?
SD-WAN. So yeah, in this case, what we're looking at to start with is replacing, I don't want to say segment routing, but a lot of people have come to us with segment routing to replace MPLS and using SDN to control the switches to properly pop on and off tags. We've also been approached about different, I guess I'll call them VPN solutions. In this case, what customers are looking for, or what we've been asked to look at for a lot of these customers, is the actual connection and setting it up, bootstrapping it, type testing to start with. We're really at this point, early investigating, working. A lot of this testing is coming from the branch routers at this point. So we're getting into what their customers are asking them for. What's interesting about this is you're hearing from different routing vendors and they have slightly different issues. So what we're trying to do at the IOL is take all that information and be a neutral third place and come up with a test specification that might meet all of their needs, so they're not individually having to test. One of the complaints we'll hear from the routing vendors is that they don't want to have to do 9 different testings for SD-WAN with 9 different service providers. They would much prefer to do one. So you have to work with the service providers to come up with a set of test cases that they say, yep, that covers 80% or 90% of what I need, and then I can do the rest in-house and feel more comfortable. So a lot of it's us working with that, and that's what we're doing right now. For more details, it sounds like a lot of it to start off with is conformance for what they need to be supported in the router, whether things like metering, VPN support, different algorithms, those kind of things, making sure that the device supports the technology for VXLAN, its number of VXLAN connections, how it does it, those types of things.
Thank you, Timothy, and thank you everyone for attending today's press conference, Industry Collaboration and the UNH-IOL's new SDN Consortium. We appreciate your time. Again, the hashtags for the press conference are #SDN and #SDN Testing. And once again, if your question was not answered, we will follow up with you after the press conference, or you can contact Andrea McLean at Wireside. Her email is amclean@wireside.com. We'll also send you an email with the link to a recorded version of this press conference and presentation. Once again, on behalf of the UNH-IOL, thank you again for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.